Lucy Hutton stared at her computer screen, her eyes bleary from hours of staring at spreadsheets and emails. It was nearly 7 p.m., and most of her colleagues had already left the office. But Lucy couldn't bring herself to leave. She had a presentation to give tomorrow, and she wanted it to be perfect. As she read through her notes for the 10th time, the door to her office opened, and in walked Joshua Templeton. He was impeccably dressed, as always, with his dark hair neatly styled and his blue eyes sparkling with amusement. "Still working, Lucy?" he asked, his lips curling into a smirk. Lucy bristled at the sight of him. Joshua was one of the top executives at Bexley Books, the publishing company where they both worked, and he had a reputation for being ruthless and charming in equal measure. He was also Lucy's biggest rival for the position of assistant to the CEO, which was opening up next month. "I have a presentation tomorrow," Lucy said, trying to keep her tone neutral. "Ah, yes. The one you've been working on for weeks. I'm sure it will be adequate," Joshua said, his smirk growing wider. Lucy clenched her jaw, resisting the urge to snap back at him. Instead, she took a deep breath and reminded herself of her own abilities. She was smart, capable, and hard-working. She didn't need Joshua Templeton's approval. "I'll let you get back to work, Lucy," Joshua said, turning to leave. As he walked out of her office, Lucy couldn't help but notice the way his suit hugged his broad shoulders, or the confident way he carried himself. Despite her annoyance with him, she couldn't deny that there was something undeniably attractive about Joshua Templeton. But Lucy didn't have time for distractions. She had a job to do, and she was determined to do it well. The next day, Lucy arrived at the conference room early, armed with her presentation and her nerves. As the other executives trickled in, she took deep breaths and rehearsed her opening lines in her head. When it was finally time for her to present, Lucy stood up, adjusted her blazer, and launched into her pitch. She spoke confidently, with passion and precision, and by the end of the presentation, the room was buzzing with excitement. As the executives filed out of the room, Lucy felt a sense of pride wash over her. She had done it. She had given a flawless presentation, and she knew that it had set her apart from the other candidates. But as she gathered her things and made her way back to her office, she saw Joshua Templeton waiting for her outside. He was leaning casually against the wall, scrolling through his phone. "Nice presentation, Lucy," he said, looking up as she approached. "Thanks," Lucy said, trying to keep her tone polite. "But I have a feeling I'll be getting the job," Joshua said, his voice dripping with confidence. Lucy rolled her eyes, refusing to let him get under her skin. "We'll see about that." With that, she walked past him and into her office, determined to focus on her work and not on her arrogant, infuriating colleague. As the days went on, Lucy worked tirelessly to prove her worth to the company. She stayed late, took on extra projects, and made sure that everything she did was impeccable. She didn't have time for anything else. But despite her best efforts, she couldn't shake the feeling that Joshua was always one step ahead of her. He always seemed to know exactly what to say to get under her skin, and he was always charming. Lucy turned her attention back to her computer screen and tried to focus on the task at hand. But all she could think about was Joshua's words. She knew she should be angry with him, but there was something in his eyes that made her heart flutter. She shook her head and tried to push the thought out of her mind. The rest of the day went by in a blur. Lucy barely spoke to Joshua, and when she did, it was strictly business. She couldn't let herself be distracted by him, not when there was so much at stake. As the workday came to an end, Lucy gathered her things and headed towards the elevator. Just as she was about to step inside, Joshua appeared next to her. "Hey, Lucy," he said, his voice low. Lucy turned to face him, her heart racing. "What is it, Josh?" "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for what I said earlier. I didn't mean to upset you." Lucy bit her lip, unsure of how to respond. She knew she should be angry with him, but all she could feel was a strange mix of emotions. "It's fine," she finally managed to say. Joshua nodded. "Good. I'll see you tomorrow then." With that, he stepped into the elevator and the doors closed behind him. Lucy let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding and made her way home. The next day, Lucy arrived at the office early, determined to get a head start on her work. She was surprised to find that Joshua was already there, hunched over his desk and typing away furiously. "Hey, Josh," she said, as she walked past his desk. He looked up and smiled. "Hey, Lucy. You're here early." Lucy shrugged. "I had trouble sleeping last night, so I figured I might as well get an early start." Joshua nodded sympathetically. I hate it when that happens. Anything I can do to help? Lucy shook her head. No, it's fine. I just need to power through. For the next few hours, Lucy and Joshua worked in silence, each focused on their own tasks. But every time Lucy glanced up, she found herself staring at Joshua. She couldn't help but notice the way his muscles tensed as he typed, or the way his jaw clenched when he was deep in thought. Finally, Joshua broke the silence. Hey, Lucy. I was thinking. Since we're both up for the same position, maybe we should team up on the project. You know, combine our strengths and work together to really knock it out of the park. Lucy hesitated. She knew that working with Joshua would be a mistake, but she couldn't help but be intrigued by the idea. I don't know, Joshua, it might be too risky. Joshua leaned in, his voice low. Come on, Lucy. Think about it. We could really make a name for ourselves. And who knows, maybe we'll even have some fun along the way. Lucy felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew that Joshua was dangerous, but there was something about him that she couldn't resist. Against her better judgment, she nodded. Okay, let's do it. Joshua grinned, and Lucy felt a flutter in her stomach. She knew that this was a mistake, but she couldn't help herself. She was already in too deep together on the project. Lucy found herself drawn to Joshua more and more. They spent long hours in the office, bouncing ideas off of each other and laughing at each other's jokes. Lucy had never felt such a strong connection with anyone before. It was as if they had been made for each other. They had so much in common, but Joshua was the complete opposite of her. Despite his difficult personality, Lucy couldn't resist the attraction she felt towards him. She longed to be close to him, to feel his arms around her. She was consumed by her desire for him. One day, Joshua caught her staring at him. She felt embarrassed and quickly looked away, but he didn't seem to mind. Instead, he walked over to her desk and struck up a conversation. They talked for hours, and Lucy felt as if she had finally found someone who understood her. As the weeks went by, Lucy and Joshua grew closer. They would sneak off to empty conference rooms during lunch breaks to talk and laugh. Lucy loved the way he made her feel, and she couldn't imagine her life without him. One day, Lucy received an email from HR. They were announcing an open date for the award. Lucy knew that she had to do everything in her power to get the position, but she also knew that Joshua would do the same. The next few weeks were tense as Lucy and Joshua both worked hard to prove themselves as the best candidate for the job. Finally, the day of the announcement arrived. The whole company gathered in the conference room as the HR director announced the winner of the position. Lucy held her breath as the HR director called out Joshua's name. Lucy's heart sank as she realized that she had lost the job and that she would have to continue working alongside the man she was falling in love with but had lost the chance to be with him in the future. Lucy tried to hide her disappointment, but Joshua could see right through her. He walked over to her and put his hand on her shoulder. I'm sorry, Lucy. I know how much this job meant to you. Lucy looked up at him, and for a moment, she forgot about the job. All she could see was his deep brown eyes looking at her with concern. Thanks, Joshua, she managed to say. Listen, Joshua said, I know we've been spending a lot of time together, and I want you to know that I value your friendship. You're an amazing person, and I don't want anything to come between us. Did Joshua feel the same way she did? She wanted to tell him how she felt, but she was too scared. What if he didn't feel the same way? Of course, Lucy said, trying to hide her disappointment. I feel the same way, Joshua. But the truth was, Lucy didn't just want Joshua's friendship. She wanted more. She wanted to be able to tell him how she felt without fear of rejection. Lucy closed her eyes and let out a long breath, trying to steady herself. She took a few moments to compose herself before opening her eyes and looking up. Are you all right? He asked, his voice low and concerned. Lucy felt her cheeks flush as she nodded. Yes, I'm fine, she managed to say. Joshua looked at her for a few more seconds before finally stepping back. All right then. I'll see you tomorrow. Lucy watched as he walked away, his broad shoulders disappearing into the crowd. She couldn't help but feel a sense of longing as she watched him go. She had never felt this way about anyone before, and the realization made her feel both elated and scared at the same time. Lucy woke up early the next morning, feeling both excited and nervous about the day ahead. She had a lot to do at work. As she got dressed and made her way to work, she couldn't help but replay the events of the previous day in her mind. When she arrived at the office, she found Joshua already there, sitting at his desk with a cup of coffee in hand. He looked up as she approached, a small smile forming on his lips. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm. "Good morning," Lucy replied, feeling a rush of happiness at the sight of him. As they got to work, Lucy found herself stealing glances at Joshua whenever she could. She couldn't help but feel drawn to him the more. It wasn't until the afternoon that they found themselves alone together again. Lucy was standing in the break room, pouring herself a cup of coffee, when Joshua walked in. "Hey," he said, leaning against the counter next to her. "How's your day going?" Lucy looked up at him. "It's going well," she managed to say. Joshua smiled at her, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's good to hear." There was a moment of silence between them, and Lucy found herself staring at Joshua's lips, wanting to know what they felt like against hers. She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. "I should probably get back to work," she said, taking a step back from Joshua. "Yeah, me too," he replied, straightening up. "I'll see you around." As the day progressed towards its end and the sun began to set, Lucy couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness. She had finally gotten everything she wanted, but at the cost of losing Joshua. She wondered if things would have turned out differently if they had been honest with each other from the start. They got into the cab, and Lucy gave the driver her address. As they drove through the city, Lucy's mind wandered. She thought about all the things she would miss about Joshua, his sense of humor, the way he challenged her, the way he always seemed to know what she was thinking. She felt a pang of regret for not telling him the truth earlier. "Lucy," Joshua said, interrupting her thoughts. She turned to look at him. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry for everything." Lucy felt her heart swell with emotion. She reached out and took Joshua's hand in hers. "It's okay," she said softly. "We both made mistakes." They rode the rest of the way in silence, their fingers intertwined. When they arrived at Lucy's apartment, Joshua walked her to the door. They stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. "I should go," Joshua said finally. Lucy nodded. "Yeah, you should." They hugged, and Lucy felt tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't want to let go. "Goodbye, Lucy," Joshua said, pulling away. "Goodbye, Joshua," Lucy said, her voice choked with emotion. As Joshua walked away, Lucy couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. She knew that things would never be the same between them again. But at least she had learned an important lesson, that honesty was always the best policy. As she turned to open her door, Lucy couldn't help but wonder what the future held for her. But one thing was certain, she was ready for whatever came her way.